You are listening to part 6 of our 8-part series, Bountiful Beans, The Wise Woman Way, with Susan Weed at Time Monk Radio. Hello, Susan. Welcome back to Time Monk Radio.
Hi, Gemini. Did anybody offer you a tofu burger in this past week?
No, they didn't, but I was glad to hear all that information last week because I generally don't eat soy unless it's fermented, because I remember what you've said in the past about fermented soy.
Yeah. It's easier, and it's easier on our guts, too.
I agree.
You know, my gut could never really find its settle point around the soy.
Yeah, I don't care for it either.
Yeah. So, and many people have said that to me. They said, "Oh, I so appreciate, you're telling me that any bean will do. It doesn't have to be soybeans." And my belly is so much happier for it. Of course, the darker the bean, the healthier it's going to be. And there again, we look at soybeans and we go, "Oh, well, they're golden."
Oh,
so the red beans, the black beans, the darker the color of the bean, the more health benefit we're going to get from it. But we're going to look at 2 light-colored beans this week. We're going to look at chickpeas, and we're going to look at fava beans. Now, fava beans are perhaps, I should say, the classic bean, the ideal bean. Fava, F-A-V-A, fava, very easily becomes faba, F-A-B-A, in the same way that many children will say vanilla ice cream instead of vanilla ice cream. Remember that the bean family is called the Fabaceae, faba. It gives its name to the whole family. So the Fabaceae family, the family of the fava bean, basically. And the name fava bean actually comes from an ancient Roman family name. Fava beans or broad beans are quite the menu item I found throughout the Mediterranean region. They're also called field beans, beans, horse beans, bell beans, and in China, Sichuan beans. They also are grown today throughout the world, but especially in North Africa, Southwest and South Asia, as well as being extensively cultivated. So, what are fava beans? They are probably the most ancient bean in cultivation and the easiest to grow. Along with lentils, peas, and chickpeas, fava beans are believed to have been part of the Mediterranean diet for 8 to 10,000 years. They overwinter very, very well, and as we said, they are really easy to grow. They withstand really harsh climates, really cold climates, and they can be grown in soils that have salt in them as well as in soils that are very heavy in clay. Most beans, let's face it, are a little fussier about where they want to grow. So fava beans are really like the poor person's way to bring fertilizer to the field. If the soil is less than fabulous, then fava beans are going to be the thing to grow. And I ask, can they still, are they still used as a cover crop? Even if we harvest the beans? The answer was yeah, because it's the roots that fix the nitrogen in the soil. Many times the plants are plowed back in to feed that extra nitrogen into the soil, but fava beans are really giving in both directions. They give to the soil and really help us to be able to grow crops in really marginal lands, and they also give to us really wonderful, wonderful beans. They're usually eaten when they're quite young and tender, and that's also really wonderful because it means that we don't have to wait. We can plant the fava bean seeds. We can plant them in just about any kind of soil. We don't have to worry about the weather. They're going to grow. They're really hardy. And we can start eating them almost as soon as those pods form. But if we are going to actually go for the beans of them, then we would have to wait until the fall. So I was very interested to see that they are usually pureed, cooked up and pureed, because that was the way that I had encountered them in the Mediterranean area. And I never met up with a dish that's supposed to be a classic in a certain region in Italy, where fava beans are pureed and then some wild chicory is sauteed and mixed in with it. But what I have been served throughout that area is what I thought of as broad bean soup. And remember when we were talking about peas, and we were talking about peas porridge hot and peas porridge cold, and that kind of thickened pea soup, which is not from a thickener, but actually from the beans themselves, from the fiber in them. That's the kind of fava bean soup that I think of as well. And they are easily used in that way, but they're also dried when they're mature and then ground up, and they are the magic bean that makes falafel. Now, I was introduced to falafel in Israel, and I really liked falafel. What's not to like here about this nice little round ball that is dropped into oil and fried and given to you in a piece of pita bread so that you can walk around eating it? But I couldn't get anybody to really explain to me exactly how that falafel was made. All right. I knew that it was something ground up, but I couldn't quite figure out exactly what it was. It turns out to be fava beans. I was also quite fascinated to discover that the pods, which are really velvety, have been thought of as a folk medicine. And when you see these pods, you'll see why. It's almost like they're like some fairy has come and turned them into the softest, velvetiest coat. And that soft, velvety outside of the pod throughout the area where they grow is considered to be a remedy against warts. I wonder if it was used by actually rubbing the furry part on the wart, or if it was taped somehow over the wart. Maybe wart remedies. We actually tape the thing down on the wart, and I could see how that would work. Using fava beans medicinally goes back way back. And so by the time we get to Pliny, it's, he's already quoting other people way before him about using broad beans, especially as a laxative, but also in similar ways to the ways that we think of using them now for their ability to help the person to maintain good hormonal status, especially in the cardiovascular system. Fava beans are eaten all over the world, and not just eaten, but eaten by many people all over the world. They're extremely common in Egypt, and not just by poor people, but rich people eat them as well. And the Egyptian national dish is made from fava beans and eaten at breakfast. Fava beans are the most widely consumed food in the Sudan, and they are the main dish for lunchtime. And they are eaten in Ethiopia and are used in every aspect of Ethiopian life. Fava beans there are often prepared as a flour and then that flour boiled up. But you also find them being used as a kind of here's something to snack on while we sit around and tell each other stories. Storytellers especially like to eat boiled salted broad beans because they say they slide down the throat very easily and keep the stories flowing. Fava beans are eaten in Nepal, and they are often eaten as a green vegetable because the growing season, of course, is very, very young. Right, they are one of the essential ingredients of the famous dish excuse me, Pachamanca in the Andes of Peru, and are widely regarded there as a way to maintain integrity in a child who has diarrhea or something wrong with their gut. Remember that diarrhea kills more children worldwide than any other problem. So fava bean flour boiled up and given to the child to sip is thought to be the way to, and is shown to be, the way to really calm down the diarrhea, even if there is a problem with cholera. This can be helpful. And how interesting. So we see that Pliny says, make sure that you eat fava beans if you are constipated because they will act as a laxative. And here they are being used in exactly the opposite way. This is the kind of thing that drives many scientists and doctors a little crazy when it comes to plants. Fava beans are one of the most common foods in Colombia, and they are also used in the Uzbek culture. And in the Uzbek culture, fava beans are not only eaten, but they are used as a tool for divination. As a matter of fact, so much so that the kind of generic term for somebody who's a seer or, who can kind of give you a hint of what might be to come is bean thrower. And my sweetheart, who's really into language, said, I wonder if that has anything to do with bean counter. And I said, well, I don't know, because we think of a bean counter as somebody who's very staid and really like counting the beans at one by one, whereas the bean thrower is somebody who's like really out there and doing things. But when I looked it up, I found that the expression "not worth a bean" somehow is connected to fava beans. And I'm not sure if it's in praise of fava beans or putting fava beans down when they say it's not even worth a bean. In Italy, fava beans are sown on November 2nd, All Souls Day. And little cakes made in the shape of fava beans, though not made out of them, are called the beans of the dead. And this is partly because when all other crops fail, fava beans grow. There have been times when there have been extremes of drought, when there have been all kinds of weather disasters, which has wiped out all of the other crops, and yet the fava beans grow. So the fava beans are the food that, in a way, we give our heart to because it has carried our ancestors through. No wonder they're associated with good luck. It's said in some places in Italy that if you carry a fava bean on you, you will always have what you need. You'll have the essentials of life. In other words, the fava bean isn't going to make you like win at the lottery, but it will help you see to it that you always have a roof over your head and something to eat. Back in Rome on the 1st of May, Roman families used to eat fava beans. What a wonderful custom. In Portugal, fava beans are baked inside the Christmas cake. This, of course, nowadays has been replaced by baking some little metal token into the cake. But before people had those little metal tokens, it was a fava bean that was baked into the cake. And whoever got the fava bean got, well, whatever that family's tradition was. And in France, the tradition is often that the person who finds the bean, the token, becomes the king or the queen of the meal. And that is not necessarily as great as it seems, because it means that the drinks are on that person, that that person should be providing all of the liquor for the event. In Spain, sure, king, queen, but all they have to do is provide next year's cake, so it passes from person to person. The Grimm brothers have a story in which a fava bean splits its sides laughing. Now, isn't that an image for us? The image of this little bean going, ha, 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 ha. Oh. What else can we say? I think I've told you the story before, but I certainly must tell it again, that when my consort and I were in Spain, we were served fava bean soup, this really thick soup. And as he was eating it, I looked at him and I said to him, you know what? I don't think you should eat that soup. And he said, well, are you trying to get my soup out of me? And I said, well, no, I'm just suddenly remembering this piece that I translated in Latin class. And it was about fava beans and how the villagers fed the Roman soldiers fava beans, and it made them go away and leave the village alone. I said, I don't remember in the piece it's saying exactly what it did to the Roman soldiers, but it must have been something pretty bad. And since you are part Italian, I think you probably shouldn't eat this fava bean soup. And he's like, I don't know. But at that point, he'd eaten half of it, and he looked at me kind of askance, and he did indeed give me the other half of the bowl. And it was good. It was quite wonderful. And the next day, we were at an art museum, and I looked at him, and suddenly his face was quite white. And I said to him, are you okay? And he said, no, I am not okay. I am most decidedly not okay, and I need to go and sit down as soon as possible. And we found a bench in the museum to sit down on. I looked at him, I said, what's going on? He says, it feels like somebody kicked me between the legs. He said, it feels like my testicles are swelling up. I don't know what's going on. I looked at him and I went, fava beans? That must be what happened to the Roman soldiers after the villagers gave them fava beans. They felt like somebody kneed them between the legs, and that's why they went away and left the villagers alone. And he looked at me, and he could almost laugh. He was really in a lot of pain, but he could almost laugh. And he said, well, I'm really glad you stopped me from eating the other half of the bowl of soup. So fava beans are quite wonderful, but check your ancestry. Certainly, many people in Italy do eat fava beans, so it's not everybody, but there are some people who do seem to have a reaction to them. What did they put on my falafel in Israel when they gave it to me? Right here I am, standing at the street stand, the corner in Jerusalem. And I have just been given a falafel, and inside of these hot balls that had been fried. I now know balls of ground up fava beans, and then they pour this wonderful, luxurious, nutty sauce over the whole thing. It's tahini that they pour over it. And tahini is a good friend to chickpea, the next bean that we want to look at. Sesame, of course, is a seed. It's not a bean, but the Arabic word for chickpea is hummus. And hummus, of course, is boiled, smashed chickpeas with, you got it, tahini added to it. So tahini is a friend of falafel, the fava bean, and tahini is a friend of hummus, the chickpea, as well. Hummus, the dish made from chickpeas and tahini, has really gotten an inroad in American culture. About 17% of American households know what hummus is and actually have some on hand. I notice it at more and more parties where I'm going to. Now, being rather a purist, you can guess, of course, that I wanted to make my own hummus. So, how would I make my hummus? I'm going to get the dried chickpeas. I'm going to soak them overnight to get rid of all those anti-nutritional qualities and then dump that soaking water down the drain with few anti-nutritional qualities. And then I'm going to take the chickpeas and I'm going to cook them. And I'm going to cook them until they're soft. Well, my first try at doing that, I was never able to cook the chickpeas until they were soft. It turned out that I was one of the very few people buying chickpeas to make hummus. Everybody else was simply going to the store and getting hummus. And so the chickpeas that were in the store where I bought them had been there for a very long time. And it turns out that chickpeas, and this is true of most beans, but especially so for chickpeas, the chickpeas tighten up as they dry and as they age. And they get to a certain stage of tightness where you can't ever really rehydrate them again. Or we would cook our chickpeas and cook our chickpeas and cook our chickpeas, right? And cook them hours and hours and hours, and they never got really, really soft. So I finally figured out what was going on there, and I went to another place, and I got some fresher chickpeas, and I cooked them, and they were soft, although it took 2, maybe 3 hours. And then, because I was going to be processing them and mashing them, I don't know, like, how was I going to do it? Maybe in a blender. I didn't want it to be hot, so I let it cool. And that is a very, very big mistake. In fact, to get smooth hummus, the chickpeas, cooked chickpeas, must be processed while they are very, very hot, because the skins will only disintegrate when the chickpeas are hot. Now, of course, we love the skins. There's lots of fiber there. And you do not, believe me, you do not want to sit there with a big pan of thousands of chickpeas, taking the skins off the chickpeas. But that's what we had to do, because we cooked our chickpeas till they were soft, and then we let them cool. And then we tried to smash them, and, well, we could smash the chickpeas. We couldn't smash the skins, and so we had to pull the skins out. And I was beginning to see why people were going to the store and buying hummus, because this was an awful lot of trouble. Perhaps that's why, like fava beans, chickpeas are often ground into flour. This flour is called gram flour in India. And chickpeas can also be used to make falafel in addition to hummus. So that was a great joy to know. And I'm even wondering if the original falafel that I had was perhaps even fava beans and chickpeas ground together with their good friend sesame tahini drizzled all over the top of them. you want to know something really interesting? Well, at least I found it really interesting. There are some varieties of chickpeas which pop like popcorn. Yeah. In the late 1700s, and again during World War One, chickpeas were roasted until dark and then ground and used as a substitute for coffee. Very interesting. Some people eat chickpea leaves sparingly in their salads. In general, human beings don't eat the leaves of plants in this family, in the bean family. We tend to go for the seeds, and if not the seeds, the flowers, and occasionally, and we're going to be talking about astragalus next week, occasionally we go for the root of the bean. So the leafy part is the least likely part for us to use. When we talk about red clover next week, we will talk about different ways that red clover is sold and come back to this point that the leaves of beans are generally not used as food for human beings, although, of course, animals like them a lot. Chickpeas are especially rich in copper and have a very broad range of amino acids. Both the fava beans and the chickpeas were probably originally cultivated because of the very high levels of nutrition that both of these beans possess, as well as their very high fiber content, which allows one to feel quite full even if only eating a small amount of food. Science has been backing that up, finding that if chickpeas are included in a meal, the people being studied report higher levels of satiation. They eat less in the meal, and they are less likely to eat between that meal and the next meal. In one study, not only did people eat less, but they ate fewer processed food snacks. Quite interesting. The chickpeas were actually filling up not just the gap for feeling full, not just the gap for getting some protein, but the gap for getting high-level nutrition and especially minerals. And it's lack of minerals, I think, that causes people to go for those processed salty snacks. Chickpeas are also called garbanzo beans, and they are, like most beans, getting a lot of hip, hip, hooray in terms of heart health. In one study, 2 groups received 28 grams of fiber a day. One group got fiber from garbanzo beans, and the other from different plant sources. The garbanzo bean group had significantly lower levels of LDL cholesterol, total cholesterol, and triglycerides after only 30 days of eating garbanzo beans on a daily basis. Let's go back to what I said last week. We're focusing on different beans because I think they're pretty fascinating, some of the things that these different beans do. And I'd like especially to go back to the roots of things. And so fava beans and chickpeas were quite fascinating to me because they've been used for such a very, very long time. But in a study, they're going to give somebody the same thing every single day, but you don't have to do the same thing every day. What we want is more beans in the diet. Doesn't have to be chickpeas every single day. Another study, it took only 1 week of eating a third of a cup of chickpeas a day to measurably improve blood sugar and insulin secretion in participants. Not only are these bountiful beans, helping our hearts, but they are helping our blood sugar levels as well. About 75% of the fiber in garbanzo beans is insoluble. And remember, those insoluble fibers that are found in beans don't get digested in the small intestine. They are insoluble. They can't get mixed with stomach fluids or water, and so they don't actually get moved through the process of digestion. And thus they wind up in the large intestine pretty intact. There, they are metabolized by bacteria, certain bacteria that live in the colon, and they produce these bacteria from insoluble fibers, short chain fatty acids. Short chain fatty acids are fuel to the cells that line the intestinal wall. Thus, they help to lower the risk of colon problems, including the risk of colon cancer. And once again, this is true of virtually all beans, but chickpeas are a wonderful bean to include, and I find that they're more and more available. Certainly find them at salad bars. And I'm sure you're going to say, oh, but the chickpeas at salad bars are canned. You know what? Better to eat canned beans than to eat no beans at all. The health benefits of beans, and especially the cardiovascular benefits of beans, so far outweigh the high salt content of canned beans, which at home, of course, can be dealt with simply by rinsing the canned beans in cold water, that I think we should just do whatever we need to do to eat more beans. And that's getting close to the end of our show for this week. I want to invite everybody to drop by SusanWeed.com if you haven't recently. There's always new and interesting things going on. And WiseWomanMentor.com as well. And if you're interested in any of my courses or books, please come to the Wise Woman Bookshop.com, where you'll find lots of interesting things still going on. If you are out on the West Coast, I'm going to be out on the West Coast at the beginning of September. And if you're hearing this at a time when we might connect, check out my website and see where we might connect. Gemini, thank you so much for once again being a wonderful host.
Thank you so much, Susan. This concludes part 6 of our 8-part series, Bountiful Beans, The Wise Woman Way with Susan Weed at Time Monk Radio.